right, okay? Let's start making acquaintances, okay? Yes, we are now about to begin. I'm told yes, thank you. Maybe all be upstanding for our guest of honor. Thank you. Let us clap for our guest of honor as he comes in now. His Excellency, thank you so much that you have found time to come with that. Thank you. Yeah, you still remain standing. Your Excellency, please let's all remain standing. Let's remain standing. With your permission, Your Excellency, let's remain standing as the guests now take their seats. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and once again, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Monica Juma, the National Security Advisor. Thank you very much for gracing our occasion. The Ambassador of Norway, thank you, of Norway, thank you for joining us. May we now request, as we are starting, we are going to have to pray the 4 national anthems. One, we will start with the Kenya National Anthem, the East African Anthem, the Norwegian Anthem, and then the University Anthem. Let's all be outstanding. Attention, let's go.
Ilinde Jumuiya Afrika Mashariki, tuwezeshe kuishi kwa amani, tutimize na malengo yetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike, umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. University of Nairobi, we labor all together in search for knowledge and truth. We bless and honor thee. We are the pinnacle of excellence in knowledge, knowledge to serve our motherland. Be not angered by pride, let excellence prevail. May we all shun the pitfall of being the ivory tower. With sacrifice and dedication, our problems will all.
Let us dedicate our morning to the Lord and pray in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless us, Lord, this morning as we gather to reflect on your goodness to all of us, and we ask you to guide us bless our guests who have visited our university, and that our relations with every of our guests may yield fruit for us and for them. We have just celebrated in Thanksgiving as a nation 61 years of Madaraka, freedom and peace in Kenya. Of these 61, Kenya and Norway have had a 60 years relationship of wonderful multilateral relations to foster peace and freedom for growth of your people, O Lord, to recognize that everyone, every person is good in your eyes and belong to you. We thank you, Lord, for all this history that is made by you. Help us to unfold to the future. Lord, you who are the Lord of life, the Lord of peace, the Lord of freedom, that we may continue recognizing that all humans are to be free. All humans belong to you. Inspire the conversations that are going to be held this morning, that we may grow as we walk out in a certain way to becoming better persons for the future of the world and of your people. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
You may now take your seats. Thank you very much indeed. We are now trying to usher in now the next level. We have Jeff Konange, my co-MC. Thank you.
Yes. Well, I see there are many people coming to the hall to join us. Today is a very great day for us. We want to acknowledge all our great guests who are here and the speaker who will be speaking this morning, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Espen Barth, Eide. We also have in the house the Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, Professor Patrick Vakoyen, who is here with us. We are glad to have also the Ambassador for Norway, and we are glad to have Ambassador Monica Juma, who is a presidential advisor and an alumni of this university. University of Nairobi believes in, yes, we clap, University of Nairobi believes in the issue of unity and work, and through this motto, we have achieved great strides as a university. We woke up today in the morning when we heard that we had gone up the rank in the QS ranking. We are in the top 1,000 in the university, in the world now. So that, so sir, you are coming to speak to the best in the region. I also want to recognize all the vice chancellors who are here and the principals, various colleges who are here. I saw my colleague, Professor Jenga Monene from CTEC University, and all others you are recognized here. So thank you very much. For me, it was to welcome you and then hand over to Jeff to proceed with the program. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Appreciate it. His Excellency Espen Barth Eide, Norwegian Foreign Minister. Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, National Security Advisor, Republic of Kenya. Professor Patrick Vakoyen, Chancellor, the University of Nairobi. The University of Nairobi. Did I get it right? University of Nairobi staff and board members and other university staff members, ambassadors, high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps, University of Nairobi students and students from other universities around the country, and some high school students as well. It's good to see you guys there. Give yourselves a round of applause, student. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this public lecture. It's all about 6 decades of relations between Kenya and Norway. It'd be surprising, it's almost as old as I am. the relations between Kenya and Norway. And the future can only be brighter. So after the public lecture, there will be a panel discussion. I will lead that between Foreign Minister, National Security Advisor, and Professor Karuti Kanyinga. We'll do that for a few minutes, and then we'll open the floor to some questions. And here's where my timekeeping skills come in. I insist on one question per person. No follow-up, no 2-3 questions, one question. And I keep to my word. So when it comes to that time, please raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you. Tell us who you are, who you represent, and ask your question, and we'll have a good event. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome on stage my good friend, the Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, Professor Patrick Verkooyen.
Five countries were the first to recognize Kenyan independence in 1963. Norway was on the front line. 4 developed nations are working tirelessly with Africa on the climate crisis, on climate adaptation, and put the largest adaptation program in the world on the map. Norway is on the front line. Indeed, 3 European countries recently recognized there is no credible alternative to a 2-state solution for Palestine. Norway is on the front line indeed. My name is Patrick Verkooyen. I'm the Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, the University of Nairobi. So, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished guests, faculty, but particularly our main shareholders, students, karibuni. Yesterday, we learned from Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, that we are on a highway to climate hell. Last month, we learned from Kristalina Georgieva, head of the International Monetary Fund, that the world is losing $7.4 trillion US, 3 times the size of the economic output of sub-Saharan Africa, because of geo-economic fragmentation. We have a food crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a debt crisis, we have a cost of living crisis, we have escalating wars. And Honorable Minister, our guest of honor, I'm here to say we're truly in a world, in a shock-prone world, where perhaps international cooperation itself is under threat. So this is why we are delighted today to unpack this topic, the topic of great importance for this country, for this continent, in fact, for the world. 60 years of bilateral relations, Norway and Kenya, multilateralists and partners for peace and security in a divided world. And before we hear from our distinguished speaker, what we can learn from the past and what the future may look like, let us zoom in a little bit on Norway and country and Kenya, what they have alike, and what that partnership could look like. Let me offer 3 things. 1, jobs. Well, Norway and Europe is actually one of the oldest continents, an aging population. Kenya and Africa is one of the youngest populations. So there is a deal to be made here. 2, energy. Honorable Minister, I'm sure we'll hear from you today also in your previous role as climate minister, that Norway has an abundance of gas as a transition fuel. We, Kenya, have an abundance of renewables. There is a deal to be made here in a decarbonized world. And 3, food security. Kenya, Africa, think about it. The African continent has the largest uncultivated land area to produce food. Africa should not just produce food for itself and stop the billions of dollars of import, but in fact, it should go to the high bar and be the breadbasket of Europe, including Norway. So, friends, let me turn now to our distinguished speaker. The Kenyan Foreign Minister of Norway, who perhaps you can best be described as a diplomatic marathon runner. Why? Foreign Minister twice, Minister of Defense, Minister of Climate and Environment, Special Envoy at the United Nations, Managing Director, World Economic Forum, architect behind the Biodiversity Pact. And for the faculty, and for the deans, and for the DVC, this minister is one of us, because he's a very active scholar and political scientist. So welcome him, Honorable Minister, to this Hall of Knowledge. And with your permission, Honorable Minister, let me take the liberty to quote from your own work, which you issued a couple of weeks ago. It's now May 28. You held a speech on implementing the two-state solution to Palestine. And I'm quoting you. You said, it's like a big puzzle. It's a puzzle where many of the pieces are known, but there are some critical pieces that have not been laid. So the question today for this dialogue is, what is the puzzle of the Norway-Kenya cooperation in this globalized world? What are the known pieces, and what are the pieces still to be laid? And Honorable Minister, and Your Excellency Ambassador, representing President Ruto, we at the University of Nairobi, we have our own offering for this puzzle of the Norway-Kenya cooperation. We call it the Big Five. And yes, Vice Chancellor, we're in the top 1,000 of best universities in the world, but that is by no means good enough for us. Because if you look at the top 10 in Africa, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, South Africa, 6, 7, 8, Egypt, 9, 10, South Africa. We are number 12, and we want to be, and we will be the number 1 here in Africa. And for that, we will launch the Big Five. We have launched the Big Five, and let me tell you, sir, what it is. Number 1, which is a topic very close to your heart, innovation. Did you know, students, that Nairobi is the number 1 capital in Africa on startups? The number 1 capital in startups. But it is still, there's lots of untapped potential. If you look at Ivy League universities in the United States, where the ambassador joined President Ruto recently, you see that they drive innovation, they ride the wave. And how do? They do 2 things. Roots and wings. They create through Roots an innovation park, where startups and funders and venture capitalists can come together in one location. And the wings is that once you have that one location, finance will flow. So here at the University of Nairobi, soon we will open up our own Silicon Savannah at the University of Nairobi, number 1. Number 2, our offering. Honorable Minister, when you were Minister of Climate and Environment, you spoke very often about climate is not something bad. It's a growth agenda. It's a prosperity agenda. So here in the University of Nairobi, as our second bold initiative, we will establish a Kenya Green Jobs Center, where we will partner with industry, captains of industry. We will say, listen, sir and madams, you're a captain of industry. You want to ride the wave of the green industrialization? Great. Where can we partner? Because we as a university can provide the labor force for your business. But we need to have a deal here. If we develop the curriculum at that Kenya Green Job Center, you need to absorb our students. And that's, Honorable Minister, we want to partner with Norway on. 3, AI. You've spoken a lot in your previous speeches on the importance of artificial intelligence. We here in Kenya, we're on the receiving end. We're importing artificial intelligence. This is not Africa-led, Africa-owned. It's thrown at us. We have some of the startups on AI, but that has to go to scale. That is why, as our third initiative, we will establish the first school of AI on the African continent, and we want to partner with you, Norway, on this. 4, a topic very close to your heart, sir. The Honorable Ambassador went to the United States with the President. It's interesting to realize, students, the President of this nation, alumni of the UN, the Deputy President, the ministers, Supreme Court justices, captains of industry, even the rich ambassadors, even the rich of this country. Where do they go? They go to the Ivy League universities. Dozens of Kenyans go there, to Harvard, to MIT, to Columbia, and they have every right to do so. But if you live in Mukuru, in the slums here next door, or if you live in Makwene, you also have dreams. You also want to lead. That is why we will establish here at this university the Leadership Institute, together with Harvard University. And we want to work with you, Honorable Minister, to make this a reality. 5, health. In this nation, over the last 2 decades, health indicators are vastly improving. There's still lots of work to be done, but we have a fantastic faculty of health sciences. But if you go there, sir, if you were to have time and you were going to the health science faculty, you would hear the students and the faculty say, well, we are great, we're the best in the continent, but we're lacking basic laboratory space. We don't have the equipment, so we're doubling down on that. That is our offer, sir, to the Norway-Kenya cooperation, not for the last 60 years, but for the next 60 years to say. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in concluding, let us not forget where we are here today. It's because of higher education. A daughter of a smallholder farmer can become a doctor. It is because of higher education that the son of a miner can manage the mine himself. It's because of higher education that a child of a peasant can become a president of this great nation. So our offer as University of Nairobi to both Norway and to Kenya is to be part of the solution, to be part of the puzzle, because with that, this country, this continent is unstoppable. Thank you very much indeed.
Another round of applause for Professor Verkooyen, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. And Professor Verkooyen, congratulations on the endorsement by former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the Leadership Academy that's going to be established here at the University of Nairobi. I think it deserves a round of applause there. All right, folks, on to our moment of the morning. Please welcome on stage His Excellency Espen Barth Eide, Norwegian Foreign Minister, to give his public lecture. Please welcome him.
Excellencies, ambassadors, the Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, Ambassador Dr. Yuma, Monica, all students, all staff, Hamjambo. It's such an honor to be here at this great University of Nairobi, the University of Nairobi, I learned. This Center of Excellence, and I'm really appreciative of all of you who came to listen and take part in a conversation, which we will have after my opening statements and speech. And it's really an honor to be here in Kenya. And I want to say to you, Dr. Yuma, Monica, that we actually realized we've known each other for decades. And we have an academic background, both of us. And I realized that we've both been working on climate, energy, defense, and foreign affairs. And now you are where you are, and I'm where I am. So you see, this is the right background for these kind of jobs. And it's logical because all these things are closely connected. It's the physical security of our own country and our neighborhood and of the world, but also the security of the planet, security of the environment, security of life on Earth. All these issues are key issues of local, national, regional, and global concern. And in order to deal with them and to progress as societies and grow our economies and become healthier and more prosperous peoples everywhere, we need to bring some order back to the international realm, bring some order back to the international arena. So I'll talk about that, talk about the state of affairs in international relations, and on the many things that I know that Kenya and Norway agree upon today, as we have done for all these years. It has already been mentioned that we have 60 years of diplomatic relations. It was very polite to say that we were among the first 5. We happen to be number 5, but still that's quite good. And that's why it's 60 years, incidentally my own age right now. But my personal relationship to Kenya is 48 years old, because my first visit to this great town of Nairobi was when I was a boy of 12. So since you're at the university, you can do the maths. That's 48 years ago. And I've had many happy returns to Kenya and to Nairobi, and I've seen a lot about what has happened over these many years. So most of the time of independent Kenya, I have been coming and going and seeing the progress of your nation, a country that really stands out with a strong and growing economy, an open economy. And like Norway, if you are open to the world, if you have an open economy, if you want to have imports and exports and investments coming in and out, you need to live in an orderly neighborhood, and you need to live in an orderly world. It's good for us when our neighbors are thriving. It's not good for us when our neighbors are in trouble, and that's true whether you live a little bit south of the equator or whether you live 60 to 70 degrees north as we do. So we have a lot of things in common, and that's a consistent tradition of our two countries. And we work together on so many issues on this global agenda. And since you mentioned the issue of Palestine, maybe I should just start there. A reflection on the acute state of the affairs right now. We have wars in Europe. We have the Russian aggression against Ukraine, a blatant violation of international law, where a sovereign nation, Ukraine, was invaded, an attempt to take over government, which failed, and now occupation of parts of Ukraine's land by Russia. And Kenya and Norway protested correctly, as one should, against that, because that violates a key norm of the international community, namely the norm of sovereignty. So I appreciate that we have a similar view on that. Then right now there is a very violent situation in the Middle East. We have a terrible suffering in Gaza, in Palestine, inflicted by excessive Israeli response to what was initially Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. And I think most of us agree that the country, of course, has the right to defend itself against the terrorism. But all use of force and all use of military means has to be, and I say that as a former defense minister as well as a current foreign minister, has to be restrained by the rules of warfare, what we call international humanitarian law. And we said early that we felt that Israel was in grave violation of key principles of international humanitarian law, which speaks about the obligation to make a distinction between fighters and civilians, or soldiers, military and civilians, and also the principle of proportionality, which is about you shall not use military force beyond what is, can be justified by the advantage. All this has been violated, and we now have an Israel in fear of terror, population in Gaza fleeing around trying to escape bombs, but also hunger. And a population in the West Bank, the other side of Palestine, which is exposed to an ever-growing number of illegal Israeli settlements and an increasing amount of settler violence. In that very dramatic situation, we have been saying, point one, rules must apply equally to everybody. So if a Russian bombing of a block of flats full of civilians in Kharkiv or Kherson in Ukraine is illegal, so it is in Khan Yunis or in Gaza City or in Rafah. It's exactly the same norm, and all people are equal, so we were very clear on that. And it should be obvious, and I have been vocally, openly, on record many times criticizing many of my Western friends for not being clear on these principles being universal. And just to bring it closer to here, we have maybe the most terrible war anywhere right now is the one in Sudan, where millions of people are affected. Millions of are IDPs, I believe 10 million internally displaced, a few million escaping to neighboring countries, and a very violent situation, but largely forgotten by the world media. Because I think there are too many conflicts and you can't take in all of them, so there's been much more focus on what's happening in Europe and the Middle East, and that leaves less space, tragically. But for us, we don't forget, and we maintain a strong focus on the humanitarian situation, but also looking for political solutions in Sudan. We've been working closely with Kenya on Sudan and also South Sudan for decades, all back to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. We work on the Horn of Africa, and we are also following closely what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in the neighborhood around there. So all these crises needs our attention, and they need a consistent and principled approach. And let me dwell with that for a second, because there are those who say out there, actually many key countries now saying, look, the principles are not applied equally across the planet, so there are no principles. Well, that's a dangerous path. I think the right way to say is that the principles are not applied equally around the planet, so we have to make sure that they are applied equally around the planet, re-establish a strong sense that these principles were enshrined in the UN Charter, in the Human Rights Charter, in the Geneva Protocols, in all these legal instruments, not as a menu that you could choose from when it suited your geopolitical interest, but as principles that should be universally applied. This matters for peace and security in the countries in question, but also the neighborhood. And this drama of this very polarized international community that we have right now is bad news. It's really bad news because there are all these questions, all these challenges, and you mentioned, Patrick, Chancellor, you mentioned some of them in the introduction. There are so many issues that we need to deal with together as mankind, because there are challenges in our relationship to the physical world, which has nothing to do with politics between people, but rather with mankind's relationship to Mother Earth. And it's really the key issue. And as a former climate and environment minister, I had the honor of being president of UNEA 5, which not the last one, which was 6, but 5 2 years ago. That was the UN Environmental Assembly, meeting precisely a few kilometers away from here at the UN offices in Nairobi, where we managed to achieve quite a lot of breakthroughs that actually began a series of good developments in global negotiations on nature, environment, prevention of pollution and climate. I would say UNEA here in Nairobi, then the Kunming-Montreal Agreement on Nature or Biodiversity later that same year, and then all the way to COP28 in Dubai, which actually spelled out more clearly than ever before the need for a credible, sustained, inclusive, just energy transition from fossil to renewable via transition fuels, via carbon capture and so on, till a world where we emit less and eventually no more climate gases than we're able to pick up again. These are really the key questions of mankind. And this is one of the areas where international cooperation continues to grow, but it's really challenged by this return of geopolitical competition, which is why we need to maintain a solid focus on what is really important. So we need to deal with these conflicts. We need to restate the trust in multilateral institutions in that they actually matter in order to save lives, to save economies, to help countries thrive, which also makes us thrive because, as I said, it's not even if you have a stable, growing economy in Kenya or in Norway, having wars in your neighborhood as we have between Russia, our neighbor, and Ukraine, or here on the African continent is not good for us. It's not good for them, that goes without saying, but it's not good for us. So we need to have an internationalist approach, and this is clearly something that Kenya has. So we work closely on these issues. President Ruto is also a member of the Ocean Panel. We are also ocean nations, and if you think that we have polluted land too much, which I happen to think, and destroyed the habitat on land, just look at the ocean. It's actually worse. It's not so easy to see it because it looks like it always did. You see the surface, it's blue. It looks quite nice most places. But if you go deeper into the ocean, you will see that the level of acidification, the loss of oxygen, overfishing, the overpollution, and also the fact that the ocean has helped us capture much of the carbon we emitted, but that also changed the composition of the ocean. It's also being warmed up, and when it's warmer, as you all know, whether you're from the physics faculty or not, warm water takes more space, so you have global warming, not only because of melting of ice, but also because you have a warmer planet, and hence you have rising tides. All of these are common challenges that requires a solid cooperation, and the Ocean Panel, where the President of Palau and the Prime Minister of Norway are the co-chairs, also has the honor of having President Ruto as one of its members. This is really trying to set an agenda for the oceans of the planet, one of these international challenges that we need to strengthen on the global arena, because we see these coalitions of concerned countries, high ambition coalitions or Ocean Panel or contact groups or all these different formats of countries that care about a specific problem or general problems working more and more together and closer together. In this area, Africa is becoming much more important. Africa is young. Africa grows fast. It is the fastest growing continent. It has tremendous economic potential. Of course, if it is hampered, it is because of in many countries weak institutions or weak compared to what you want to be a progressing country. I'm not talking about Kenya, but many other in the neighborhood, and also all the wars. But the potential of Africa is incredible, and the potential of Africa is particularly visible if you believe that the world will take the environmental and climate crisis seriously, because the world will then put a priority on renewable energy. And Kenya's energy mix, and actually Africa's energy mix, is quite good when it comes to the balance between fossil and renewable. The problem is too little energy. So, in order to produce more, in order not only to export raw materials to be processed in European countries or in China or in Russia for that sake, Africa, I believe, and this is my firm conviction, and I know many of my African colleagues agree with me, need to move more into manufacturing. Means actually exploiting raw materials, using renewable energy to process them, using brains and technology, factories to produce stuff, things and services, goods and services that somebody wants to buy. This is really the way to go from developing to middle income, eventually to high income countries. It requires sort of an emphasis on this. With the energy revolution, Africa actually has an advantage because the accessibility, there's no shortage of sun. There's a lot of space. There are many of these renewables which are particularly fit the closer you are to equator because you have stable supply. It is not very costly, actually. It is costly on the day of investment, which is why we are also working on how can countries like mine, through their development assistance, also help de-risking investment, reducing the cost of capital, which is typically what hampers good projects for growing in Africa. It's not that the idea isn't good, it's not the lack of good people, it's the lack of capital. Why? Because taking a loan is simply much more expensive for the same loan than in my country because of all kinds of rating and insecurities. And what good partners can do is to take initiatives to reduce the cost of capital, how much it costs to finance something, and then things will start moving. And one of the things that can start moving is really reaping this potential of clean energy, of course in an environmentally friendly way, and connect that to the manufacturing. The markets in developed countries, for instance Europe, are increasingly asking what is the carbon footprint of the goods or services you sell to us. In Europe, that is known as CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, with some people in Africa has seen as a threat to African exports. I think it's the other way around. I think it's a great opportunity because if these exports are based on renewable energy, on relatively low-cost production, you can actually have an advantage compared to some of the more middle-income markets, which are still very coal-heavy and very carbon-emitting, because you will then go straight through without having to pay this price or this extra fee, and that will improve your product's access to these markets. So these are sort of the economic effects of more serious climate policies, and they actually matter, and they should matter to a country which has the ambitions it has on renewable energy. It's good for the planet, but it's also good for your economy. And that's actually a great message. And this is something I worked a lot on. So the more I worked on it, the more convinced I am about this connection. We also need to reform the multilateral system as such. And in September, Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations has called the Summit of the Future, or Summit on the Future, which will discuss sort of the key issues I just mentioned, how to organize ourselves, how to strengthen multilateralism. And here, Norway's views are very close to the views of Kenya and many other African countries, actually on a surprising number of issues. We think the Security Council needs to be reformed, and we believe there must be permanent African seats. We will not argue which countries will take these seats. I will leave that to Africa. Good luck with that conversation. But we do believe there needs to be an African permanent president at the Security Council. We also want to do something about the veto, because just adding countries with more vetoes will statistically lead to more vetoes, and veto is part of the problem. So in opening up and reforming the Council, we also need to do something with the veto. It was up to me, you could take it away. I don't think that's happening, but there are ideas about who can soften and limit the use of vetoes in the Security Council, so that we don't have this eternal problem that wherever it's about Israel, the US vetoes, or wherever it's about Ukraine, Russia would veto, and so on. This is a serious conversation we're having with African countries, and also with the African Union and with the Africa Group. There's another great African initiative which comes from what is called the Africa Group. It's not exactly the same as the African Union, but it's very overlapping. It's the African countries in the United Nations who have taken the initiative to establish a global tax convention, a global to really deal with issues of taxation on a global level. Many of my Western colleagues say, well, you don't need to do that at the UN because we do that at the OECD, the Organization for Cooperation among Developed Countries. And yes, there's good work happening at the OECD, but it's not the universal body. And I asked my friends in Europe, what would we think if the African Union said, we are now going to develop a global convention for everyone, and you are invited to come and speak for 3 minutes, and we will listen politely, and then we will go to make this convention. They wouldn't like it, right? So the thing is, we need to discuss this at the UN level as well, and Norway has then taken a very different position, actually together with Iceland, on this particular issue, and we are now in the Bureau working with many of the initiators on how to develop this, this work on global tax. Why is that interesting? Well, because what is a state? I mean, a state are many things, but there are at least a couple of features that always distinguishes a well-functioning state. One, of course, and here everyone from social science, political affairs would know, monopoly of the use of violence. You should have one army in your country. If you have more than one, you have a problem. So normally you have a monopoly on military force, and of course a monopoly on internal security, police and internal security, rule of law and so on. No-brainer, everybody knows that. That's a key feature, functioning state. The other one is the right to tax individuals and to tax companies, which is also a state function that you can't just establish. If other people tax you, you have a mafia, you don't want that, you want the state to tax. But in order to do that, it's not enough to have the legal opportunity. You also have to have an economic system where the government can actually get hold of a piece of the wealth that is generated in your country for universities, for hospitals, for police, for the military, for running the state, for cleaning up stuff, all the things that the public sector does. And what we have now is an economic system that makes it all too easy to extract resources, for instance, in an African country, but then move the profits across your multinational company and take the money out in somewhere with a very low tax, or maybe no tax at all, in a tax haven, for instance, or in certain countries that are specialized on that. And that's a very serious transfer of wealth. Or rich people in your own country who also end up with the money ending up in Zurich, Switzerland, or in Dubai, or in Cayman Islands. This is one serious international issue. Africa put it on the agenda, and we support that work internationally. Also a theme I will discuss with my Kenyan counterparts here. How can we continue on this path? That takes me to yet another part of the international system, the international financial institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. There are also, these institutions are helpful and useful for the world economy, but they were set up for a different time, and they need to reform for new times. Luckily, we have leadership in this organization to agree with that, but it's always the leaders who decide, because it's the stakeholders, the members, and this is also something we work with Kenya and other African countries to deal with. You also mentioned, and coming to the end here, another issue which is critical, and where we've seen Kenya and the Kenyan President Ruto and the African Union taking a clear position. It's another environmental issue, and I want to commend the work on that, which is soil health. It might be something that the people dealing with agrarian studies should deal with, but it's actually a problem for all of us. We are depleting the capacity to create food. African can be a bread basket, but we have to do much better in how we produce across the planet, because we have been over-fertilizing, we have been depleting key nutrients from the soil by particularly sort of heavy industrial production to produce more, and now there is a growing concern about this issue of soil health. So the earth, as meaning the physical earth, or the earth as the planet, is very, very connected. And just as oceans, this is an issue for international cooperation. Health, like health. One health is a concept I really like. The idea that the health of human beings and the health of the planets are closely connected. After all, our life depends on the life systems that our planet provides. But sometimes things happen around us which create pandemics. And this is really an issue. And as a foreign minister also in previous times, and my Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, who also has been a foreign minister, we have, both of us, always said that health is one of these issues that requires global cooperation. You cannot solve health only in your own country. If a pandemic comes from your neighboring country, or as we saw a few years ago from the other side of the globe, it will hit you, and we need to meet these challenges jointly and together. And we need to do it in a fair and equitable manner. I know a sense that many Africans have, which I so much empathize with, that in Norway or in the UK or in the European Union or in the United States or in China, people had their 4th vaccine doses before many people here got the first one. This is clearly sort of very, very unjust, a dysfunctional system. First and foremost for those who have to wait till with their first doses till others got their 4th, but actually for everybody, because these kind of challenges needs kind of an equity in response for the interest of all of us, because it's one health. So, you know, if a pandemic develops in a less regulated, poor country, it will eventually also come to Norway and Kenya, and that's why we need to see these as global issues. So, coming to the very end, my point here is the world needs more cooperation. It needs countries who care about cooperation. It needs countries who take a principled stand, who believe that the things we agree to in the UN or in the African Union or in the European Union or wherever we meet are actually meant to be, they're for real, and they're meant to be applied. We are not saying like the artist or comic Groucho Marx once said that these are our principles, and if you don't like them, we have others. We should have one set of principles, and they should be applied consistently. We need to strengthen global institutions. We need to make them apt for our time to appropriately reflect the power relations and the economic relations of the planet of 2024, not 1945. And we need to strive to put these sort of common challenges of mankind on the agenda. And that requires, first, making sure that we reduce the amount of conflicts, we promote peace, we work together on reducing those conflicts that are man against man, so that we jointly can deal with all these issues, which is how to manage a good life on the planet, which now have 8 billion people, growing to probably 9 or even 10 before it's expected to stabilize. That is perfectly doable, but it requires a recognition of how we organize an economy that can both be just and fair, but also climate and environmentally friendly, and that requires a solid investment in multilateralism. And this is something we should talk about as we celebrate 60 illustrious years of cooperation between Kenya and Norway. Thank you for the attention.
Once again, round of applause for Espen Barth Eide, Norwegian Foreign Minister. I don't know if I'm the only one who noticed it, but there was no speech in front of him, no teleprompter. How does he do this? That's why you're Foreign Minister twice and Defense Minister. Well done, sir. Well done. Great speech. I'd like to ask my fellow panelists to come on the stage. Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, National Security Advisor, and Professor Karuti Kanyinga. Both of you please come on stage and we'll have a little discussion. Let's appreciate them as they come on stage, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we'll use the mics here. And my first question is, you're talking about the 60 years relationship between Kenya and Norway. In this day and age where the world is so tumultuous, I mean, from, like you mentioned, from Ukraine to Palestine to Sudan, it's so tumultuous right now. How can we forge closer relationships between Kenya and Norway?
Thank you. Well, precisely by dealing seriously with these issues, you know, the fact that we share a concern about the seemingly internal challenges of the DRC, the breakdown in Sudan, the not so happy developments of South Sudan, which we remember Kenya and Norway were working closely, long before the CPA, when both settled the South Sudan issue, but also establishing the new state of South Sudan. A lot of work to be done there. Horn of Africa, Somalia, for all the reasons. The fact that we see eye to eye on the analysis of the problem, but also trying to find solutions, is good for the region, but I think also fosters cooperation, because it builds the togetherness between us on serious countries trying to do good for other people, but as I try to say, also for ourselves, because it's good for Kenya that there is no war in the DRC or Sudan, and it's good for Norway if there's no war in Ukraine, even because that's our neighborhood, and in that sense, working together and having this, and I really want to recognize. Thank you for the applause on our recognition of Palestine. I appreciate that. Here I agree with many Africans, but I'm also happy that Kenya is one of the countries who spoke clearly out against the Russian invasion. That means that we are countries who are against double standards in both directions. Because if you pick one and not the other, you are in the double standard land. So these are ways that we can work together, and then not to prolong all the issues of common concern in the environment, for instance.
Great. And Ambassador Juma, you have a wealth of experience in diplomacy. How much better can our relationship with Norway improve, especially when you look around the world? It looks like Africa's being ignored more and more, and Sudan being one example, and other places, and Ethiopia and other places. How can we forge a closer relationship and keep Kenya and Norway in sync?
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for that question. But let me begin by thanking the Minister for a very good opener to this discussion, and to welcome him to Nairobi once again. We hope that his mission will be fruitful. I am very delighted also to be in this panel with the Minister and with Karuti, two people that have had a great impact on myself, both professionally, but also in terms of at the personal level. In many ways, personally, and I think it's important for purposes of disclosure, my other side, my other life is Norway, in many ways. Norway has made me who I am professionally and personally, having had a very strong relationship with one of the institutes and institutions in Norway, the Mikkelsen Institute, which chaperoned my doctoral thesis dissertation. So I come a long way with both the minister and with Norway and many other distinguished professionals in that country. And this relationship, as you say, Jeff, is your age, this relationship. I think these tumultuous times offer new opportunities. And what we need to focus attention on is those new opportunities. To start with, the DNA between Kenya-Norway relation exists. There's a very strong DNA. Whether it is in terms of the values that we share, or whether it is in the way we define and shape the problems of the world today and in the future. And I think given the geostrategic complexities today, the middle countries are got to hold the fort in defining the new world. And so the issues around the opportunities presented by the climate action are critical. The debate about ocean, which seem to be new, are not new. Norway was with Kenya when we hosted the high-level conference on blue economy in 2018. I don't know who remembers that, which defined the parameters of the blue economy as we know it today. So it is these opportunities that we must anchor on together. And in my view, I think what I wanted to persuade the minister to reflect on is revitalizing the Nordic Africa Dialogue series, where there was serious thinking from the researchers, from the academia, and then you feed it up the policy chain. Right now in the crisis, policymakers are grappling and responding without the benefit of rigorous research and analysis. And I think we need to find a way, which takes me back to what the Chancellor was saying, the use of academic and research institutions to frame the issues, to search the solutions, to offer the scenarios, to offer the options to policy, so that we do not make policy from the heart and from reactionary, from being a reactionary. So the DNA is there. We just need to look at the opportunities. In the midst of the crisis are many opportunities that will frame the future and that will frame the next epoch of human development.
Well said, well said. Mr. Minister, I saw you writing some notes real quick. I think that Nordic-Africa relations, can they be renewed? Can they be strengthened?
Absolutely, and there's a very solid tradition there, because the Nordic countries, who are Western countries, but they took a somewhat more, they were early in criticizing colonialism, for instance, and were very, all of us in the North were very instrumental as colonialism came to an end, and the end of apartheid later, and all that rise of Africa. So out of that came these institutions. Actually, only a month ago, there was a Nordic-African foreign ministers meeting in Copenhagen. And I think all of us, the African and the Nordic, because we had a review at the end, said this was much better than a few years ago. It is actually being revitalized. So at the foreign ministers level, and that is not only speaking about Africa and Nordic countries, it's about how we see the world and how we deal with common challenges. So that to me was a success. And the Danish chair, my Danish excellent foreign minister colleague, also brought in a business dimension. So we had African and Nordic business leaders, a separate seminar, and we attended part of it as the ministers, talking about exactly this, how to go from aid to trade, how to foster investments, what are the framework in which you can have sort of serious investments coming to this rich continent, of nature-rich and people-rich continent of Africa, with the opportunities that we talked about. So it is being revitalized, but I totally agree we need to do more of that. So it's a good framework.
Right. Professor Karuta Kanyinga, I saw you vigorously scribbling notes over there. The question I want to ask you is, analysts and critics have said that the fear is that Africa might be isolated from the rest of the world more than it has been in the last few decades because of what's happening out there. Is there that fear?
There is that particular fear, but that fear may be misplaced because Africa is getting its act together. There is a long time ago when Africa used to have what we can call wait and see diplomacy. But to date, there is no country worth its name in the world that can stand on the fence when the right and wrongs, the fence when there is right and wrong. Africa is always trying its best to stand on the side of the right. The countries likely to be left behind and isolated are the countries that will stand on the side of the wrong. And there is very clear definition of what we are calling right and wrong here. It's about global governance. It's about correcting the imbalances that have been witnessed in the past. In fact, I would have expected the foreign minister to bring everybody to speed with what happened to NORAD in 1990 in this country. The University of Nairobi Department of Political Science and Institute for Development Studies were talking with the NORAD about doing a study on the role of NORAD in rural development in East Africa. President Moi one night decided that NORAD should close. That's a feeling of how bad governance can be, and the whole of Turkana was closed out from basic services and basic delivery. Mr. Minister, bring back those resources to the University of Nairobi. We complete the study with the University of Oslo that we were partnering with. But let me say that Africa cannot be left behind because now we are making choices on more obligations to promote humanity together with the countries that matter. To protect others is not a responsibility that should be left to the West alone. We have also got a duty, like Kenya has tried in the past, to protect humanity in Somalia, to promote governance in South Sudan, and to support the weak when it matters most. Because we can also be found in that particular kind of situation if we do not choose between the right and wrong. And that's where the world is going on. Maybe what needs to be corrected, and this is what I would have expected Mr. Minister really to touch on, is the form of incoherence in development cooperation that we have. Sometimes also there are double standards when it comes to the meaning of partnership between us and them, between global north and global south. Partnership may be there by name, but it's not there in practice. And that's what causes tension. And African countries start wondering, where do we provide the support that is required if partnership does not mean the same at all times? It's high time we corrected the histories of international cooperation and inequalities and incoherence that we find that sometimes leads to lack of trust. Now, the fortunate thing is that the Nordics, I think, as my colleague, we were classmates, so I think I can call her Monica, you know. We were doing political science here together. Trust and confidence in international cooperation is built on basis of history. The Nordics, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden have demonstrated, of course, that through respect of one another, through respect of people's freedoms and choices matters. Finally, let me say, Africa must get its priorities right if it doesn't need to be left behind. To be left behind means that you are not getting your priorities, and you are likely to be moved by the sale of the weed, which we have seen in global international cooperation, most often more than not. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Well put, well put. But let me ask you real quick, Prof, and you know, just for a couple of minutes, should we be worried about what's happening across the Sahel, from Mali to Niger to Burkina Faso, coup after coup after coup in the 21st century? Should we be worried?
Fortunately, you are speaking to the right people at the right forum at the University of Nairobi. University of Nairobi is in charge of Afrobarometer in Africa. We conduct studies in 39 countries, and for the last 25 years, we've been doing that at the Institute for Development Studies. We predicted that same thing through data, and that's why I think I love what Monica said. Evidence-led policy interventions matters. In the Sahel, all the countries that have fallen into military are countries where citizens for many years have been saying they don't like the mode of governance in their respective countries. In fact, all of them, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, our Afrobarometer data shows citizens who are saying they prefer other mode of governance than the kind of elections they were witnessing, because elections were not leading to the leaders that they wanted. In fact, leaders were choosing the electorate rather than the electorate choosing leaders.
Wow, powerful. Mr. Minister, let me switch gears here real quick. You were talking about 3 countries endorsing the state of Palestine the other day, which was a very bold move. A question some people are asking is there a fear of backlash after this move?
Well, actually now it's 4, because Slovenia came a few days ago, so it's 4 European countries in this wave. You know, most of the planet's countries have already recognized Palestine. What is new is that Western European countries that's the new thing, but that was important. And I'm proud and happy that we were able to do that. And I have to say just one word on that. We didn't want to do that just in the void, just as a symbolic act. We did it working very closely with a group of Arab and other OIC countries on the one hand, and a number of European countries, trying to re-establish the idea of a regional peace for Israel and Palestine, a Palestinian state to be recognized and physically established, strengthening the Palestinian Authority, but also normalization between Saudi Arabia and a number of other Arab states with Israel, the mobilization of non-state armed groups like Hamas, and really coming to a two-state solution. So our recognition was an injection of hope into that process. Backlash, well, Israel didn't like it, and they made that clear. Almost everybody else applauded, or at least were reasonably favorable, and the Palestinians were thrilled because they felt that this is re-establishing their position as we move towards, the final path to a two-state solution, which has to come. And I have to say, in this horrible situation, which is the Middle East right now, for the Gazans, for people West Bank, but also the fear experienced by people inside Israel, there is only one way out, and that's the two-state solution. That's to establish Palestine, and then you need the other states. So we are, for many years, been looking for the right moment to do that, because we knew it was the right thing to do, but now we also found the right moment to do it, and I think it was exactly the right moment. And I think over time, I believe, it's almost, the historians will write the history books of the future, but I believe that this will be a small piece of a bigger puzzle that will lead us closer to as the two-state solution. That's very important for Palestine and Palestinians, obviously, needless to say. But it's become such a symbolic issue at the world stage. I mean, there's 7 million Israelis, Jews. There are 7 million Palestinians. There's like 14 million people, not that many. But the symbolic nature of this is colossal on the planet. And this is also a signal to the world and how we think about fairness and equality and decolonization. And so I think, rather than a backlash, I think it will bring us forward.
All right, thanks for that. Ambassador Juma, tomorrow, June 7th, marks exactly 8 months since Hamas attacked those kibbutzes in Israel. 8 months of madness. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel here? There's calls for peace every other day, but it looks like the war is dragging on. 8 months, could be 18 months, could be 8 years. Do you see any light at the end of that tunnel? Or is it an oncoming train?
I think humanity has failed again and again to read from history. The one lesson of history is that no war ends in the battlefront. That is the single lesson of history. We don't believe that you can find a solution to that crisis militarily. And that goes on also for a situation in the Sudan, for example. And this lesson seems to be lost, particularly on the leadership at the global stage now. But it also ties on something else that is really fundamental, the first order question. What is going on around the values that we thought were universal and that insulated people from violence? And those are the democratic values, that allow for participation, that allow for people to determine the governance structures, to the point that Karuti was making here. Democracy, and I think this is the biggest issue of tomorrow, of today, and I think we need the middle countries, the Norways, the Kenya, the others, to begin thinking, what do we need to revitalize and to inoculate democracy as a fundamental value, as a principle that secures the rights, the freedoms of people? In Kenya, we are built on the anvil of self-determination. And so if you look at our history and our diplomacy with Palestine, we've always been on the side of self-determination, the right of self-determination, and we believe that there should be a two-state solution in the Middle East as the only sustainable way to allow people to express themselves and to be part of the governance system that they choose to belong to. That goes for Gaza, that goes for Sudan, that goes for Sahrawi, that goes for everybody else. And so we see there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Thankfully, also history has shown us no situation is permanent, so it will pass. The question is how we emerge from that passage. And that is why the leadership with the coalition that is forming around the push for the Oslo Accord and for the Biden plan, and the President Ruto spoke to this a few days ago in support of this. It is important that the whole world, and not just the government, because leaders are getting fewer and fewer, frankly. But we need to think, how do we create global solidarity for just causes? Because that is what history has enabled progress to happen. That is how we ended apartheid. That is how we ended colonialism. That is how humanity ended slavery. We must also have citizens engaged in order to create the momentum for just societies and solutions.
Mr. Minister.
I totally agree with Ambassador Yuma here. I think this is incredibly important because I think there will be a ceasefire. I hope it will be very soon. There will be a ceasefire. And I think the latest initiative by Biden is probably the beginning of what will lead to a ceasefire. That stops the killing, but, which is great. But that is not a solution. And so what we are doing here is, we're trying to follow three simultaneous tracks. Get to a ceasefire, imperative. Get much more humanitarian aid in right away, imperative. But the solution must be political. Because we've seen ceasefires in Gaza before. And then there's sort of semi-peace for a few, maybe years. And then the whole thing starts again. There's some new missiles from Hamas. Israel goes in, destroys everything. We pay to build it up. And we have to get out of this vicious circle. So we cannot let this, in every crisis there's an opportunity. And this crisis is so deep that I want to see a big opportunity coming out of it, which is really to drive home the idea that there is no other lasting, credible solution. And this is the work we're doing on, and this is where our recognition can come in. Can I say one word about Sahel? Again, to Professor Karuti, I agree. I think you're onto something really important. I think there are many things went wrong, and there are many people to blame, I'm sure. But I recognize that we in the West made a few mistakes, but quite big ones. And one was, of course, promoting I'm always in favor of democracy. Democracy is good for people, but democracies will have to develop, in a way compatible with traditions of particular countries. It cannot be, it's not just saying, here's a ballot box, go vote, and then, peace and happiness come out on the other side of the ballot box. That doesn't work, all too simplistic. That was error number one. The other one is that when the global war on terror started, so-called, in quotation marks, that's what Bush the younger called it, not Norway, I have to say, but many Western countries went from a primary focus of strengthening civil society, working with women groups, trying to build society, not only the ballot box, but society, to strengthening the security services. And yes, there was some need for that, but then you got security services disconnected from legitimacy, and people get more annoyed, and then you saw what happened later, and you see the series of coups. And now we see countries trying to fish in that chaos, like the eternal travels of Minister Lavrov, trying to deal with these coup makers and make new connections, make new friends. But there's a long history of failure here, and we in the West are partly to blame for this, because there was, we had decolonization in the 60s, and you got independent African states, not necessarily democratic states. Then in the 1990s in particular, you saw a wave of democracy. You saw countries which had not only one election, but repeated election and peaceful transitions of power. Then came the global war on terror, and much of this started to reverse. So I think there are roots, more or less 20 years back, where they started to go the wrong way. So I agree with you, basically.
Great. Folks with the mics, get them ready. Folks with the mics, do you have the microphones around? Are they ready? Get your questions ready. As Professor Karuti, real quick, there's a genocide happening in Sudan. It was reported the other day, and I covered Darfur and El Fasher 20 years ago, and it was horrible then. 10 million people have been displaced now. 10 million. And it looks like not enough is being done. Do you agree?
I agree totally that the world, international media, the world attention is not focused on what is happening in Sudan. This is not the first time it has happened in Sudan. It has happened a number of times, many times. And this is not the first time Africa is neglected. Even the Rwandan genocide, again, the international community, the international media, which Jeff was working for, neglected Africa, right? And it's simply because the international media has got its own biases, which you know very well about. This is the high time Africa started calling the international media to order. Mr. Minister actually said what we require in the world is order. What we require in the world is the rule of law, which applies to virtually everyone. But I should end by saying, even as we pay attention to that, African countries have also to start paying attention to their institutions and development of leadership. And that's why I think the Chancellor was right to say at the University of Nairobi, we are starting a leadership institute, not only for anything else, but to start paying attention to what kind of skills do we require for leadership of the 21st century in both public and private institutions. That's the way the world would go. Africa should not be neglected again, but I think if the world was respecting the rule of law globally, South Sudan would be not left and neglected the way it is. It is worse than what the media is reporting. Those of us, I'm already having engagement with South Sudanese in their mediation process, and I think what is coming out in some of these particular places is what is worth paying attention globally.
Ambassador Juma.
Well, I think I could not pass the question on Sudan. Because you will know we have been very, very engaged. And the question of Sudan is not just a genocide question. I think we are facing an imminent famine in the Sudan. And it's not even a question of neglect, actually. It's that the people that are engaging in Sudan are engaging in a destructive manner. I believe, strongly so, that if Sudan were left on its own, it would solve its problem. It is the nature of interference that is complicating the crisis of the Sudan. And I think for a country like Norway that has been engaged, and we have been engaged quite closely, you will know even the manner in which it is being approached, it is quite tentative, you know? It's almost like palliative. And so you allow for forum shopping, you allow for excuse, you refuse to define the problem as it is, you know? And so I think it is important that Sudan gets a campaigner, an international campaigner. And maybe this is what Norway should do. That we know, because that is what drives a peace process. If we did not have international campaigners for the South Sudanese aspiration, we would never have had the CPA. We need campaigners for the Sudan. Campaigners that begin from the premise, which we believe to be right, that the 2019 revolution of Sudan was a civilian expression of the desire for a democratic dispensation that has been taken hostage by people that are carrying guns. Yeah. And we cannot accept that as a matter of a starting point for the Sudan. And I think this is the message that has been conflated somewhat. And so the conversation become the conversation about placating those that can deploy violence. And I think this is a very dangerous trend that we have seen taking root in the Sudan. So I think we must frame the Sudan situation correct. The Sudanese people are aspiring for a democratic dispensation where they define the governance system that they desire. And that should be at the centerpiece of the search for solutions in the Sudan, as has been expressed by President Ruto repeatedly and firmly.
Well said, well said. Okay, time for questions, folks. Well done. Thank you. Thank you.
So just to echo, I totally agree. I think we need to put the Sudanese civilians, the people back in charge. You're totally right in saying none of these so-called internal conflicts are totally internal. There's a lot of others, mixing themselves into these conflicts. And also when people are trying to make peace, you have this competition between initiatives, which exactly creates the forum shopping problem. So you need to have clarity on what is the peace process you want, what is the outcome you want, who is going to be in charge, and how do you avoid only the people or the men with guns to be in charge, but also other groups. When we were together in the council, because the Security Council, Kenya and Norway were sitting exactly the same 2 years, we were jointly proposing a lot of issues on women, peace and security, for instance, and several attempts to raise the involvement of other people than those who are typically highlighted by warfare. And that's an important part of the answer to Sudan and actually to everywhere else where you have that kind of internal tension.
Absolutely. Questions? Remember, tell us who you are, who you represent, and pose your one question. Sir, there in the middle. Where's the mic? Where's the mic? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Excellency, distinguished panel. Dr. Otele Oscar. I'm also a political scientist from the University of Nairobi, Department of Political Science and Public Administration. Yes, I research on China-Africa relation. I've read quite a lot regarding Chinese engagement in Africa. But my interest is always Western response to Chinese presence in Africa. When you look around, I don't see the presence of Norway in Africa. And I've been wondering, is it a deliberate strategy to take that kind of a diplomatic approach to your presence in Africa? If you could help us to understand that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, next one, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for a very good lecture, public lecture. My name is Laban Chiriot. I work with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, an alumni of the University of Nairobi. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for recognizing, advocating for the recognition of Palestine in the United Nations. But don't you think that going by the current architecture of the UN Security Council, the veto power wielded by some powers that we all know would not in any way allow that to pass anytime soon until the reform you are advocating for comes maybe later? So don't you think that the gross human rights violations will continue unabated, and especially compounded by the indictment by the ICC of the two leadership? So don't you think that there's an opportunity then to work on under what you used to call the coalition of the willing, outside the current architecture, to have now the numbers grow from 4 to 6 to 20 to the entire globe, so that we have an alternative that can now advocate for the peace negotiation between Palestine and Israel. So that, because if you continue believing in already what we have called a failed current system, don't you think it's high time we highlight the coalition of the willing and grow that number and have an alternative bilateral relations or negotiations to bring peace and restoration of human dignity and respect for the rule of law and human rights in that region? Thank you.
All right, good. Anyone on this side? Yeah, there we go.
Right, thank you. My name is Manasseh Gedua from Thika High School. I'll be talking on behalf of Thika High School. My question is to His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. My question comes from a base of the carbon footprint. Where do you draw the line between economic development when you're supporting our industries and we want them to get better and better so we can get more industrialized and produce more goods so we can have a better economy? And where do you draw the line between economic development and all the stuff about our industries and environmental conservation? Because I guess sometimes we also close our eyes because we want to, because we want our industries to continue growing and becoming better so we can be more industrialized. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Smart kid there from Thika, huh? Wow, I didn't know carbon footprint when I was your age, man. I didn't even know footprint. I'm not. All right, let's answer those 3 questions and then we'll go, let's prepare the next 3, stand by for that. But the first one, Mr. Minister, talk about China, Africa, Norway, Africa.
So, I mean, we follow with great interest the increasing presence of China here. Some of that is clearly benign. There's a lot of investments coming to Africa from China. But I also know that there are some concerns of sort of the long-term links that are being established and depth issues and so on, like with other donors. Did you say that we were not present? I think we're quite present in Africa for our size. I mean, for every Norwegian on the planet, there are 259 Chinese. So we are slightly, you see them more than us, put it that way. But we try to have a sustained long-term partnership, and we try to combine our different approaches to, we want progress, growth, equity, distribution, wealth, a climate-friendly development and human rights, and we try to see all this together. And we take some pride of that. I'm not here to criticize others, but there are other donors that pick one of those. And I think in the long run, working with people like us is good. But we are not against, African conflicts tend to be forgotten. I agree totally. Africa is not at all forgotten. Everybody cares about Africa. There's almost a great game for Africa right now. There's a lot of interest in who will get the raw material, who get the resources, who can exploit African wealth. And it used to be, Europe, it was America, now maybe it's Russia and China as well. But I think the key point is that to make sure that more of the wealth in Africa stays in Africa, that more of the resources are produced here, and to the young gentleman over here, in a climate-friendly manner, because I am convinced that it's perfectly possible to combine economic growth with green growth. I mean, if you invest in renewable technology, if you use resources in a circular manner, use them and use them again, not throw them away, eventually, as the world moves from fossil to renewable, from linear, which means throw away, to circular, that becomes economically viable. It makes more sense to use the resource 10 times than 1 time. It makes more sense to harvest sun for free rather than to buy oil from foreign lands for foreign currency. We just have to make that transition, and we need to do that together.
Yeah. Ambassador Juma, you agree?
I do. I agree, really. And let me just begin by saying that Africa is really the continent of the future if you look at 3 parameters. 1, it is the only continent that is young and growing. So in terms of jobs, the whole world is going to be depending on Africa for its labor market, for its jobs. Secondly, even in terms of the opportunities for climate action, Africa has one of the biggest quantum of the resources required to decarbonize. So whether you're talking about renewable energy, whether you're talking about land for food security, somebody was talking about it a little earlier on. So everybody, and that is why there is a growing interest on the African continent now. And how we negotiate that interest is going to be very critical to the product and the programs that we bring, whether they are sustainable, whether they are extractive. And that is why the conversation around the analysis and the options available is very, very important. Thirdly, if we are the fastest growing continent, then it means we are also going to be providing the world with the largest market. So, and that is why the opportunity for industry and things like that comes in. So it's a combination of these assets and the right policies in terms of how we leverage our assets for sustainable growth. So it doesn't mean that we have to industrialize in the wrong way. We don't have to go carbon to industrialize. We can go renewable to industrialize, and that is what we should be doing within the African continent. Secondly, let me speak a little bit to the enablers. The big crisis, one of the biggest crises on the continent and in the developing world, is the debt crisis, which has been compounded by a number of factors that have not been caused by us. The extent of the crisis that have come upon us, whether it is the financial crisis, the pandemic, the wars, the disruption in the supply chains and so forth, have all compounded the pressure on countries, compounding our debt crisis. And you know what happened last year, for example, to the dollar. When the dollar kind of danced, our own interest rate almost quadrupled within hours of that crisis. So this access to the financial market that the minister was speaking to becomes a very important plank on the way forward. Because even if we have all these assets, the translation of those assets into wealth depends on the availability of finance. So the way the financial infrastructure is configured, it must be part of the first reform programs that we must focus on, and which is why President Ruto has been really pushing on the reform of the international financial institution to make them fairer, so that we can access finance at fairer rates, to have realistic assessment. I mean, if we are saying that Africa has one of the largest carbon sinks, why is risk profile of this place with such a big quantum of asset become so punitive for it? So we must change the way risk is perceived, the way it is calculated, and we must persuade our friends like Norway and others to contribute more, for example, to the concession window of Eide, so that we can get concessionary rates, we can get more finance to translate these assets into sustainable development. So that conversation around the financial system that is fit for purpose, that can enable us to leverage the opportunities of today and the future, is one that we invite Norway and like-minded countries to be part of and to champion.
Well done. Professor Karuchi, do you want to tackle that question about the United Nations Security Council and veto powers and coalition of the willing?
Yeah, let me begin straight from there, that the veto powers by the super powerful is not the way to go in 21st century. The world of the future requires the global national and multilateral institutions to be much more reformed, where everyone has a voice. But Africa will also require much more strength to have collective voice and the impact on the global arena. That's the way to go if Africa was to have much more presence at that particular level, but with the right African political elites at the center, because it's not every African leader who can be in the Security Council and have impact. We know that for sure. So we need to have collective action, first of all, and create a voice that would have some difference. But let me respond to the question by the young man there. I think the young man is telling us there is contradictions in how we are facing industrialization debate in Africa. The debate in the West, industrialization in the West was through industrialization with chimneys. There was chimney everywhere and smoke everywhere. Africa is told today, don't worry with your chimneys. Don't put chimneys there because that will pollute the environment, right? But there is no proper alternative that is being given to Africa. So Africa might be a laggard in this particular case. And probably we are getting things right at the University of Nairobi when we are thinking about green skills, and that's where maybe Norway can come in. But we don't think about the University of Nairobi alone. Probably we shouldn't think about Kenya itself. We are thinking about AI, but maybe because that's a new way of industrialization, we should be thinking beyond Kenya itself and probably think about Africa. But if we don't get these debates right, we shall be a laggard. Finally, Jeff, Dr. Teller knows my position about China. I won't put my position very clearly here, but in Africa, we are also lacking the debate on what China is doing in Africa. China's development that lacks capacity development and is much more extractive than the development that we have had in the past is something to worry about, The destruction of the environment, the kind of jobs that they compete with, the kind of small-skilled jobs and entrepreneurs that they bring on the African continent is not the right way to go. But Africa is lacking collective voice because every political elite across Africa seems to be China captured. And that's where the problem is. We need to correct this.
Wow, powerful. Yeah. I'm going to take three more.
Maybe to the question on Palestine. Who was it again? There you are. Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. Well, the world is imperfect, as you know, and we will try to make peace in Palestine before we fix the entire world. So we cannot replace the US or replace the Security Council right now. But you're right, we need some kind of coalition of willing to show another direction. And that's exactly what we're doing. I talked in my speech about this it's a League of Arab States, OIC countries, together with increasing number of European countries, who are not to enforce, but to establish and build a consensus around a regional way, a settlement where all these pieces of the puzzle can be laid, because we identified piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, and say, let's put them together now. So that's in the making, and anybody want to help, come on board, because there is now an alternative path developing, and I believe that we might in a few days actually have a unanimous vote in the Security Council, because the US is now proposing a ceasefire deal, which on much better terms seen from the Palestinian side than what has happened before, and if negotiations are going well, it might actually be adopted. So things might happen, and I repeat, then we cannot just celebrate the ceasefire. We shall do that for the first 5 minutes, but then say now we have to move on to the real solution, and that's where this coalition or contact group comes in. It's soft power, but it's becoming increasingly strong.
All right. Okay, up there. Get some ladies to ask some questions, maybe, yeah? Where's the mic? Where's the microphone? There's a lady over there in the middle. Yeah.
I'm Mr. Gashanja from the Presbyterian University of East Africa, a business student majoring in accounting.
No problem.
Listening to you all speak about security and health, as a country, not as a country, with our growth, the way we're growing, lacking the words. There are diseases that are coming up, and there's a new disease that has came up among the women. I don't know if you've all heard about it, endometriosis. It's a disease, it's a very deadly disease. Very little is known about it, but so much care is needed to be given to it. Endometriosis happens when a lining of the uterus, similar to the uterus itself, grows outside of the uterus. And sometimes it can spread even to the lungs.
Okay, there is a question somewhere there, isn't there?
Yes.
What is the question?
I'm getting to it.
Get there, please.
Very little or no attention or care has been given to it. If you look at the studies, I did my own studies about endometriosis. It happens in everyone. Like among 10 women, at least one of the 10 have it.
Okay.
And you look at the numbers all over the world, it affects like 200 women.
All right, we've gone from Palestine to Ukraine to endometriosis. That's a really sharp turn here. And I just looked at the time, and we're really running out of time. The minister's been flying all night long. He's tired. He's got a tight schedule. And I think you could just wrap this up, Mr. Minister, if you don't mind. No more questions, okay? Mr. Minister, let's wrap this up.
So I am very much aware of endometriosis, and I know it's one of the biggest mistakes of modern medicine is that we've been much better at studying male health than women's health. There is a change going on now, but there are a lot of issues that have been understudied. There's something happening now, which is that more attention, more people speak. Thank you for raising it. It's a known phenomenon, and again, it requires solid research and investment in research, development of treatment methods, and international cooperation as all other health issues. But thank you for raising it.
Closing thoughts, Ambassador Juma?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't respond to this, because it touches on the concept that the minister was trying to elaborate of One Health. And if societies, we know that societies that are prosperous focus on the welfare of their populations, and in particular, women and girls. And so this question is an important one. And from where we are sitting, the discussion around building the capacity for surveillance, building the capacity to understand health, is very important to the aspiration for prosperity of the world. And so I think this, that has been raised, it's really not very well known, like many women diseases, you know, and it goes back to the question around equity and justice for all, you know, and I think it is an important issue. We know even in the cancers area, many women cancers are not the forefront cancers in research. And so this calls upon focusing in the whole of population, because the rights of people, the women's rights, are human rights, and they all must be dealt with in order that we can realize the full potential of society. So thank you very much for that, for that question.
Professor Kanyinga, closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much again for her to bring the issue of rights to health, which is very important. But let me just say, Mr. Minister, Africa is giving today to the North more than it's giving. We are training more to give to the West. Governments are spending more money to train healthcare workers who end up going to the West, and we get very little. Development cooperation itself has got its own inequalities. I think your administrative cost, even in NORAD itself, I'm sure it's over 40–50%. I'm not sure about the figures, but I think it's very high. We know it's very high by standard, by global. Development cooperation has got its own inequalities. We need to correct some of these particular challenges for people to start having trust in our development cooperation, and we need to think very seriously about how to address global inequalities for world to be one. But let me say, we all have got moral obligation to protect humanity. We cannot afford to sit on the fence, and no country worth its name in the world today should sit on the fence when other people are suffering. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, final word. Go ahead.
I just answered the question, but just one sort of general observation of hope. And I really believe in Africa, believe in this country, and I think you have, because of your youth and rich resources, there is now a potential to grow even faster in this new green economy, as we were discussing. Because it might sound unfair to say you shouldn't have chimneys, even if we had them, but actually it's the best advice. It is to say, inject yourself into the economy of the future, the economy that is now coming. It will do you good, because trying to repeat the unnecessary, inventions have been made. And this country, we had landlines, telephone lines, before mobile phone came. So every single house had a copper cable all the way into the house. You can't imagine how much copper we had to spend on that. And you had to sit at home to wait to see if the telephone rang. In Africa, of course you had in cities, but not across the land. Then came mobile telephony. And then this country had mobile banking before my country, not by advanced 5G iPhones, but by simple Nokias or Ericssons, whatever, long before, because of ingenuity. So you took technology that was imported and brought new ideas into it. So don't go the fossil route now. Go straight to the future. And what we need to do as partners and donors is to help facilitate that transition, because it is actually the best way. You need to inject the economy of Kenya and of Africa into the global economy that is coming, not the one that was. And take the inspiration from telephony, do the same thing here, I think would be the best advice. And this is not me telling Africa, because I know so many Africans who invented this totally on their own. I just support that idea.
Okay. All right, folks, and if you want to ask more questions, there will be a media session right after this. So please go then. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions. In the meantime, I'd like to thank His Excellency Espen Barth Eide, Norwegian Foreign Minister, Dr. Ambassador Monica Juma, a National Security Advisor, and Professor Karuti Kanyinge. Thank you so much, all of you. Let's give them another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your enlightening words. Thank you for your inspiration. And thank you for paving the way forward. Really appreciate that. We're just about done, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Chancellor Professor Patrick Verkooyen and your team, thank you very much for making this possible. This is really good. It's good to see. And thank you, University of Nairobi, for bringing us to the Manu Chandaria Auditorium. And thanks for everybody who was here. Even the high school kids, well done. Thank you. Give yourselves another round of applause, everybody. And for people living in Norway, my name is Jeff Koinange. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.